This is my presentation for the Children's Literature Final Project. I chose to do LGBT plus positive literature. I chose this topic because it is something that is very personal to me as a member of the LGBT plus community. It's important for there to be representation of LGBT plus people in the media that children consume for many reasons, including, teaching about accepting differences. It can be a lifeline for LGBT plus youth. And of course, art mimics life. So you have to include all different diverse groups in order to have a realistic artistic experience. And then personally, I didn't have a lot of representation growing up. It wasn't really talked about in my family, and I just didn't think of it as something normal. So I didn't realize my sexuality or gender identity for a really long time, which was harmful to me, and I'm sure that it's harmful to a lot of other people too. So that's some reasons why it's very important to have this kind of representation. The first resource that I looked at was a picture book called Heather Has Two Mommies. It's about a little girl named Heather who has two moms. It talks about her same-sex family in a very normal way. It talks about how she's just like a normal kid. She just happens to have two moms. It's important. It has very important support for same-sex families, and it promotes acceptance among children and adults. And it's just, in general, just normalizes the idea that someone can have two moms. The second resource I looked at was a picture book called Introducing Teddy. It's about a teddy bear who is transgender. So she goes from being known as Thomas to being known as Tilly, and she changes her bow tie from her neck to her head, as you can see in the picture. Its support for transgender youth is very important, and this book is obviously full of that, so that's good. It normalizes transgender youth experiences. It's easy for kids to understand. It just talks about, I used to be Thomas, now I'm Tilly. It's an easy explanation. And it's educational for kids, shows them that this is possible, and it shows how much happier that she is as Tilly. The third resource I looked at is Harriet Gets Carried Away. The summary is a little girl named Harriet who loves costumes goes on a zany adventure with some animals. She gets with some penguins, she rides an orca, then she flies with some pigeons. It's a very fun story. It's included in this presentation because Harriet has two dads, which is not an integral part of the story. I think it's important for stories like this to exist because it becomes very normal, and it shows that LGBT plus people don't have to serve a purpose to exist in stories or in real life. You don't have to have a gay character or a trans character just for plot development. They can just exist as normal people within the story. And of course, it shows support for same-sex families. The fourth resource I looked at was I Am Jazz. And the summary is a transgender little girl named Jazz talks about her journey to becoming her most authentic self. It's very realistic. It was actually written by Jazz, who is an actual transgender child or teenager. It's easy for kids to understand. It normalizes transgender youth. It supports transgender youth. And I think it's important because it talks about, the process of coming out as trans. She has to go to a doctor, or a gender therapist and, be diagnosed with gender dysphoria. And it talks about the bullying and how it just doesn't matter whether or not you're trans or whatever. It matters what's on the inside, and it's just a really beautiful story. The fifth resource I looked at was called Jacob's New Dress. The summary is a little boy named Jacob enjoys wearing dresses and faces some bullying because of it. I think it's realistic because it shows that not everyone is going to be nice to you. It's easy for kids to understand. It explains things in simple terms, lots of pictures. It normalizes gender nonconforming people and supports gender nonconforming children. That's what GNC stands for. And it shows that children often copy what their parents say, do, and think, because the child who bullies Jacob is often quoting what his dad is saying, and it just shows that, hate is taught. The sixth resource I looked at was called And Tango Makes Three. The summary is 2 gay penguins at the zoo adopt a baby girl penguin named Tango. It's a very sweet story. It's a real life story. This really happened at a zoo. It proves that homosexuality can be natural and can just be normal within the animal kingdom, and it should be normal within, humanity. And it shows support of same-sex families. Again, it's such a sweet story. The 7th resource I looked at was Worm Loves Worm. The summary is that 2 worms with no given genders get married without doing things the way they've always been done. It normalizes same-sex weddings and couples and gender non-conforming weddings and couples because both worms end up wearing a mix of traditional bride and groom clothing. It points out that gender doesn't matter as much as love and being happy, and it talks about how tradition shouldn't stop you from being happy because the whole book they are trying to fit with what has always been done, and in the end they just say, you know what, we're just gonna celebrate our love the way we want. And it's a great way of explaining to kids that, you don't have to let traditions that you don't agree with or that harm you stand in the way of your happiness. The 8th resource I looked at was called A Day in the Life of Marlon Bundo. And the summary is a boy bunny named Marlon Bundo falls in love with another boy bunny named Wesley, and they get married after a few trials and tribulations. I think it's realistic about same-sex marriage because they face a politician, the stink bug, who doesn't want them to get married because boy bunnies should marry girl bunnies. And it teaches about the importance of voting because the characters end up voting the stink bug out of office, so to speak. They just decide that he can't be in charge of them anymore. And Marlon and Wesley end up getting married. And it shows again that tradition shouldn't dictate your happiness. Just because this is how something has always been done doesn't mean that you have to do that. The 9th resource I looked at was called I Invite My Parents to a Dinner Party. It's a poem by Chen Chen. It's about a gay man inviting his parents to a dinner party with his boyfriend and making them be kind to his boyfriend. It kind of shows the complex relationship LGBT plus people can have with their families. Kind of a big theme of the poem is that he's not alone. He compares himself to the kid from Home Alone. But he talks about how he's not really alone because he has his boyfriend to support him. And it's a nice story or a nice poem. And I guess it shows that family doesn't define you or your happiness. He's clearly trying very hard to have a good relationship with his family. But in the end, this is how he lives his life, and he shouldn't have to act differently around his family. I think that's kind of a major theme of this poem. And the last resource I looked at was The Legend of Korra comic books. The summary, there's 6 of them. They're kind of broken into different chapters. But the summary is that Korra, the Avatar, the master of all 4 elements, battles some new evils alongside her girlfriend Asami. It demonstrates the hard fight that LGBT plus people have faced in the past and still face today. In the book, it talks about the way different places react to LGBT plus people. It also had to fight really hard to even happen. It's based on a TV show, and the creators of the show wanted to have Korra and Asami kiss in the final episode, and the network that it was airing on wouldn't allow it, so they had to put it into these comics. So it demonstrates that fight as well through its means of production. It paved the way for more LGBT plus kids media. Most of this is like TV shows and stuff, but it definitely went a long way with normalizing that kind of thing on television and just in general for kids. And then, of course, Korra and Asami are both bisexual. That's hard to come across, I guess. So it's just really well written, and it's just beautiful. I mean, it is. And then here's some other children's media that I figured were worth mentioning since I was talking about The Legend of Korra. There's She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, Kipo, Adventure Time, and Steven Universe. Most of them show women who love women, but Kipo is actually a men who love men representation story, or it has that story within it. Yeah, She-Ra's probably the most recent, and they're all very good, and they're all children's shows. So why are these resources relevant? Well, they promote acceptance and normalization of marginalized groups. They tell marginalized stories. They're easily understandable educational tools for children, and they contribute to supportive environments for LGBT plus children. It really just is a way to tell LGBT plus kids that they're not alone, and to tell non-LGBT plus kids that these things are normal and they should be accepted. That's how I see it. And it's educational too. Kids, I guess, might find it hard to accept something that they don't understand, but if they understand it and they learn about it and they see it like it's something normal, then it'll be easier for them to accept. So in conclusion, telling these stories is incredibly important for many reasons, including normalization, support of LGBT plus youth, all that stuff that I just talked about. And today, LGBT plus youth have more support than ever. As I mentioned, there's a lot more LGBT plus media, and there's more resources. There's an online community. There's pride parades. It's a good time to be LGBT plus. Probably not the best. I'm sure it'll get better in the future. And then we should all just normalize, accept, and love each other for our differences. That's really what's important. Yeah. And that's everything for my presentation. I'm going to link the resources that I used in the description of the video that I post when I post this video. So you can click on those. I'll link the read aloud picture books, the poem, and an online resource where you can read the Legend of Korra comics. Yep, that's it. Thank you.